The deadliest prison rule in Detroit, USA. A man walked into the Wayne County Jail on a Thursday morning in July 2023. He was not a violent criminal. He had not hurt anyone. He was there to serve 26 days for a single drunk driving charge, a misdemeanor, something millions of Americans have been caught doing. He expected to do his time quietly and go home. He never made it to the next day. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Now let's continue. Within hours of walking through those doors, Thomas Carr, 53 years old, was placed in a cell with another man. That other man had a criminal record stretching back years. He had been convicted of assault before. Twice. He had a history of psychiatric hospitalizations. He had called 911 himself just hours before being booked into that same jail and told the operator he was schizophrenic and bipolar and needed to be placed in a mental health facility, not a jail cell. The Wayne County Jail knew all of this, and they put him in a cell with Thomas Carr anyway. What happened next was so brutal that deputies who responded to the scene said it was one of the most gruesome crime scenes they had ever seen inside those walls. The attack may have lasted hours. No guard came. No alarm was raised. The assigned deputy had missed his rounds. The floor was left completely unsupervised. Thomas Carr was taken to the hospital with catastrophic head injuries. He never regained consciousness. His family made the decision to remove him from life support on July 20th. He was dead. And here is the part that will make you stop and think. This was not a rare accident. This was not a one-time failure. This was the result of a rule. Not an official rule written in any handbook. A rule that lived inside the system itself. A rule that said, when there are not enough guards, do not close the jail. Do not slow down. Do not sound an alarm. Just keep the doors open and keep the inmates moving through. That rule, the unspoken rule that kept Wayne County Jail running even when it was falling apart from the inside, became the deadliest rule in Detroit. And this is the story of how it stayed that way for years. Detroit is a city that has seen more than its share of hardship. The people who live there know what it means to rebuild. But there's one place in Detroit where the rebuilding never came. A place that sat broken for decade after decade. A place where people went in for small crimes and sometimes never came back out. The Wayne County Jail sits in the heart of Wayne County, which is home to Detroit. It is not a maximum security prison. It is a county jail. That means the people inside are not all convicted of serious crimes. Many of them are waiting for trial. Some are serving short sentences for minor offenses. Some are in there for things like missed court dates or unpaid fines. It is supposed to be a place where people are held safely until the law decides what happens to them next. But for a long time, the Wayne County Jail was not safe. Not even close. The problems did not start in 2023. They did not start in 2020. The warnings began years before Thomas Carr ever walked through those doors. And the people who gave those warnings were told, again and again, that things would get better, that the system would fix itself, that there was no reason to panic. They were wrong. Back in 2016 and 2017, something alarming started happening inside the Wayne County Jail. Inmates began taking their own lives. One after another. 8 inmates died by suicide in a span of just 13 months. 8 people. In a single county jail. In a single year and a bit. That number was so shocking that it reached the attention of the United States Department of Justice. The federal government opened a formal investigation into the Wayne County Jail. They looked at how the jail treated inmates with disabilities. They looked at whether people were getting the mental health care they needed. They looked at whether basic medical screenings were even being done. The investigation found that the jail had failed. It had routinely failed to give inmates access to the medication they needed. It had failed to provide mental health services. It had failed to conduct proper assessments when people first came through the door. So the Department of Justice in Wayne County reached a settlement agreement. The county promised to make changes. They promised to improve their suicide prevention programs. They promised that a new era was coming. But promises are just words. And inside the Wayne County Jail, Words did not stop people from dying. The biggest problem that no one wanted to talk about was staffing. The jail did not have enough guards. Not even close to enough. The Wayne County Deputy Sheriff's Association, the union that represents the deputies who work inside that jail, had been raising alarms about this for years. A former union official named Reginald Crawford spoke publicly about it. He said the union had warned the sheriff's office back in 2021 that staffing cuts were creating dangerous conditions, not just for the inmates, for the deputies too. Crawford said they warned that if things did not change, someone was going to be murdered inside those walls. They were right. In September 2020, a deputy named Bryant Searcy was working inside the Wayne County Jail when he was fatally attacked by an inmate. Searcy was 50 years old. He had been checking to make sure the cells were locked for the night when the attack happened. The union said Searcy had been working a 16-hour shift. In fact, 16-hour shifts were described as the norm for jail guards at that time. The jail was so short on staff that deputies were being stretched to breaking point. Searcy was killed. An inmate was charged with his murder. And still, the staffing did not get fixed. So here is where the rule comes in. The rule that nobody wrote down, but everybody inside the Wayne County Jail understood. When there are not enough guards to cover every floor, the jail does not shut down. It does not stop accepting new inmates. It does not call for emergency backup or sound an alarm or admit to the public that the building is not safe. Instead, the guards who are there just do the best they can. They spread out. They try to cover as much ground as possible. Some floors go unchecked for long stretches. Some rounds are missed entirely. And the inmates on those floors are left alone, in cells, with whoever they were placed next to. That is the rule. Keep the doors open. Keep the system moving. And pray that nothing goes wrong on the floors where no one is watching. For Thomas Carr, something went very wrong. And the question that his family has been asking ever since is the same question that should trouble anyone who hears the story. How did a system that knew it was broken keep running? And who decided it was okay to let it? That question has an answer. But to understand it, you need to understand what happened inside the Wayne County Jail in the weeks and months after Thomas Carr died. Because what came next was not just one tragedy. It was a pattern. And that pattern revealed something about how Detroit treats the people it locks away. There was a piece of paper, a single internal memo, written inside the Wayne County Jail system in early 2021. It did not make the news. It did not make it to the public. It stayed inside the walls of the jail, passed between officials who already knew the building was in trouble. That memo changed the number of guards on certain floors from 5 to 3, and it stayed in effect for over 2 years. 2 years in which people died. This is the story of that memo, and the people who read it, and the people who chose to do nothing. To understand how the Wayne County Jail got to the point where Thomas Carr could be beaten to death in an unsupervised cell, you have to go back to the way the jail was built. Not physically. The building itself had been standing for decades. But the way it was run, the way it was staffed, the way the people inside it were treated, that structure was built piece by piece over years. And it was built badly. The Wayne County Jail was not one building. It was a system. There were 3 jail divisions spread across the county. Division 1 was a high-rise building on Clinton Street in downtown Detroit. Division 2 was an older facility on the same street. Division 3 was called the William Dickerson Detention Facility and sat in a nearby city called Hamtramck. Each one held inmates. Each one was supposed to be watched over by trained deputies. And each one was running out of people to do the watching. The problem started with money. The Wayne County Deputy Sheriff's Association, the union that looked out for the deputies who worked inside the jail, had been saying for years that the county was not paying enough to keep good people on staff. Starting pay for a deputy inside the Wayne County Jail was around $35,000 a year. That was not even close to the national average for corrections officers, which sat near $44,000. When you are asking someone to walk into a building full of people who have been charged with crimes, you have to pay them enough to make the risk worth it. Wayne County was not doing that. So people left. They quit. They retired. They stopped applying. And the jail kept running anyway, with fewer and fewer people to keep it safe. By 2020, the staffing problem had already turned deadly. Not for an inmate, For a deputy, Corporal Bryant Searcy was 50 years old. He had been a member of the Wayne County Sheriff's Office since 2002. He was described by his co-workers as a dedicated, professional man. On the night of September 2nd, 2020, Searcy was working a 16-hour overtime shift at Jail Division 2. He was not supposed to be working that many hours, but the jail did not have enough deputies to cover the floor, so he stayed. That was the reality for many deputies at the time. 16-hour shifts were not unusual. They were the norm. That night, Searcy was performing his evening rounds on the 4th floor, checking cell doors to make sure they were locked. The floor he was on housed some of the jail's most serious inmates. He closed one cell door after another, moving down the corridor the way he had done dozens of times before. At one single cell unit, he closed the door and moved on, believing it was locked behind him. It was not locked. An inmate named DeAndre Williams had tampered with the door's lock earlier that day. Williams was 28 years old and had been arrested on carjacking charges. According to other inmates who later spoke to police, Williams had planned the attack. He wanted to escape. When Searcy walked past, Williams came out of his cell, grabbed Searcy's keys, and attacked him. Searcy was choked and beaten. By the time other deputies found him, he was unconscious. He was taken to Detroit Receiving Hospital. He never recovered. He died that night. Searcy left behind a wife and a daughter. After Searcy died, the state of Michigan opened a safety investigation. The Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, known as MIOSHA, looked into what happened. They found that Searcy had been conducting his rounds alone. The jail's own policy said that deputies performing evening lockdowns were supposed to work in pairs. Searcy had been by himself because there were not enough deputies to cover the floor. MIOSHA proposed a fine of $8,000 against the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. $8,000. That was the penalty for a system failure that killed a man who had served for nearly 2 decades. $8,000 was less than a quarter of Searcy's yearly salary. The union flagged the case. They made noise. They told reporters that the jail was in crisis. They said the staffing shortage was not just a problem. It was an emergency. And for a short time, people listened. But listening and acting are two very different things. Then came the memo. In early 2021, an internal memo was circulated inside the Wayne County Jail. The memo acknowledged what the union had been saying for months. The jail did not have enough deputies to staff every floor the way it was supposed to be staffed. So rather than hiring more people, rather than raising pay to attract new recruits, the memo changed the rules. On certain floors, the number of guards would be reduced from 5 to 3. On the 11th floor of Jail Division 1, where Thomas Carr would later be placed, the layout was designed around 5 guard stations. There were stations at each of the 4 corners of the floor, and one in the center. When fully staffed, 2 of those deputies were free to move. They could walk the halls. They could check on cells. They could respond if something went wrong. But with the memo, on floors where there were only 3 deputies, the center guard stayed in his fixed position. That left only 1 guard free to move on each side of the floor. 1 guard, responsible for an entire ward of inmates, many of whom had violent backgrounds, some of whom had mental health crises, and some of whom had no business being placed next to each other in the first place. Reginald Crawford, who was then a spokesman for the Wayne County Deputy Sheriff's Association, later described what that memo did in simple terms. When the staffing was cut from 5 to 3, the result was 2 unoccupied wards that still contained inmates. Wards where no one was watching. And that, Crawford said, was a formula for disaster. In July of 2021, just months after the memo went into effect, Crawford sent an email directly to Warren Evans, the Wayne County executive. The email said the staffing shortage and the cuts had created a very dangerous and unsafe work environment. Crawford was not using dramatic language for the sake of it. He was putting facts on paper. He was asking for a meeting. He was asking someone in charge to pay attention. There's no public record of what happened after that email was sent. No public record of a meeting. No public record of any meaningful change to the staffing policy. The memo stayed in effect. The floors kept running with 3 guards instead of 5. And the jail kept accepting new inmates every single day. Deputies started burning out. Some were working 60 hours a week. Some worked 5 double shifts in a row. One deputy worked 102 hours in a single week and was then suspended for 6 days for refusing to take another shift because he needed to care for his father after heart surgery. The union filed reports. Deputies started getting hurt. 2 were assaulted on the job in a short span. Inmates were found smuggling items into the jail through broken windows because no one was there to stop them. The system was collapsing. Everyone inside it could see it happening, and the door stayed open. Here's what makes this so hard to sit with. The people who warned about this were not strangers. They were not outsiders looking in. They were the deputies themselves. The people who walked those floors every day. The people who locked up those cells every night. They knew. They put it in writing. They sent emails. They talked to reporters. They filed complaints. And the jail kept going. The memo stayed. The guard stayed at 3. And the question that no one in a position of power seemed willing to answer was this: who made the final decision that it was acceptable to leave floors of the Wayne County Jail unsupervised? Because that decision was made. It was not an accident. It was not an oversight. Someone looked at that memo and said, yes, this is how we will run this building now. And Thomas Carr was not the first person to pay the price. In October of 2019, just months before Bryant Searcy was killed, an inmate named Antonio James was beaten to death inside Jail Division 2 by another inmate. James was 29 years old. He had been in custody for just days. He was waiting to be transferred to Ohio. He never made it. 2 deaths. 2 years apart. Both tied to the same building, the same system, the same shortage. And still, nothing changed in any way that stopped the next one from happening. There was a database, a system that Michigan built specifically to keep people safe. It was called the Law Enforcement Information Network, LINE. Every cop in the state of Michigan could pull it up on a computer in seconds. And it held everything: criminal records, court cases, mental health flags, warnings, all of it right there in one place. The Wayne County Jail had access to LINE. They used it every single day. And on July 12, 2023, the night before Thomas Carr was beaten to death, every single warning that should have stopped what happened next was sitting right there in that database, waiting to be read. Someone read it and did nothing. Here is what LINE had on file for Claude Lewis the day he walked into the Wayne County Jail. His name was Claude Lewis III. He was 28 years old. He was 6'5", and his record was not hidden. It was not buried. It was sitting in plain sight, available to anyone who looked. LINE showed that Lewis had been convicted of assault before. Not once, twice. He had 2 separate convictions for aggravated battery. He had a conviction for burning or exploding property. He had a conviction for felon in possession of a firearm. He had 8 prior convictions in total. That is 8. In his entire life up to that point, the law had caught him 8 times. And 7 of those convictions involved violence or the use of weapons. But the record did not stop there. LINE also contained a psychiatric flag. It was a warning that had been entered by court officials in Washtenaw County, the county right next to Wayne County. The warning said Lewis may harm himself or others. It said he was unable to attend to basic needs or understand the need for treatment. It said he had been involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital just 1 year before, in 2022. And before that, in 2021, he had also been in a psychiatric hospital. This was not a guess. This was not an opinion. This was official documentation, entered into the state's own law enforcement database by people whose job it was to assess whether a man like Claude Lewis was dangerous. And the Wayne County Jail had this information on July 12th, the day before the attack. But the database was not the only warning. Claude Lewis gave the warning himself. On the afternoon of July 12th, Lewis's girlfriend called 911. She reported that Lewis had become violent and erratic. She was afraid of him. She wanted him removed from their home. Police responded and Lewis was arrested on a charge of misdemeanor domestic violence. And then, before he was even taken to the jail, Lewis himself picked up a phone and called 911. He spoke to an operator, and what he said on that call was recorded. He told the operator that he was schizophrenic. He told them he was bipolar, and he said he did not want to go to jail. He said he wanted to go to a psychiatric hospital instead. He asked for inpatient mental health treatment. He said himself, out loud, on a recorded line. He told the system exactly what he was and exactly what he needed. The jail received Lewis anyway. Now here is where the classification system comes in. Every county jail in the United States has a system for deciding where to put inmates. It is called classification. When someone is booked into a jail, staff are supposed to look at their background, their charges, their mental health history, and their risk level. Based on all of that, they decide which floor to put them on and who they will be housed with. The Wayne County Jail had its own classification policy. That policy had a rule. The rule was simple. If an inmate was charged with or convicted of an assaultive crime, meaning any crime involving violence against another person, that inmate was not supposed to be placed in the same cell as someone who was there for a nonviolent offense. Thomas Carr was in the Wayne County Jail for operating while intoxicated, a DUI. That is a nonviolent misdemeanor. Claude Lewis was there on a domestic violence charge. Domestic violence is classified as an assaultive offense. Under the jail's own written policy, Lewis and Carr should never have been in the same cell. They were put together anyway. A spokesperson for the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, a man named Ed Foxworth, was asked about this directly by reporters. Why were Lewis and Carr in the same cell when the jail's own policy said they should not be? Foxworth's answer was that both of their charges were misdemeanors, and that was the reason they were placed together. But that answer did not hold up, because the jail's policy did not sort inmates by whether their charge was a misdemeanor or a felony. It sorted them by whether their charge was violent or nonviolent. And a misdemeanor domestic violence charge is still a violent charge. It is still an assaultive offense. The policy was clear, and it was broken. And there was something else. If Lewis had been flagged for his mental health issues, which he should have been, the jail had a mental health floor. Inmates placed on that floor were given their own individual cells, solo cells, not shared cells. They were also supposed to be monitored more closely than inmates in the general population. If Lewis had been put where he was supposed to be put, he would have been alone, and Thomas Carr would still be alive. On the night of July 12th, Lewis was booked into the Wayne County Jail. He was processed. He was given a number, and he was placed on the 11th floor of Jail Division 1, the same floor where Thomas Carr was already housed. The 11th floor was supposed to have 5 guards on duty at any given time, but because of the memo from early 2021, the one that had cut staffing from 5 to 3, there were only 3 deputies working that floor that night. Of those 3, 1 stayed at the center station. That left 2 deputies to cover the entire 11th floor, 1 for the south side, 1 for the north side. Lewis and Carr were on the north side. There was 1 deputy assigned to watch over every single cell on that side of the floor. 1 man, responsible for dozens of inmates. And that night, that 1 deputy did not do his job. He did not complete his rounds. Sources confirmed later that he did not set foot on the ward where Lewis and Carr were housed for nearly 2 hours. 2 hours. That is how long Thomas Carr was left without anyone checking on him. What happened inside that cell on the night of July 13th is the part that is hardest to put into words without making it too heavy to hear. So the facts will speak for themselves. The attack began at some point during those 2 hours, when no guard came by. Sources close to the investigation said the attack may have lasted anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 full hours. By the time deputies responded, Thomas Carr had suffered catastrophic trauma to his head. Multiple bones in his face were fractured. His eye socket was broken. The injuries were so severe that when his sisters arrived at Detroit Receiving Hospital, they could barely recognize him. His sister Virginia Atkins later told reporters that when she walked into that hospital room, the condition of her brother was, in her words, indescribable. His sister Ellen Ogden said it was brutal. Neither of them used those words lightly. Thomas Carr could not speak. He could not open his eyes. Doctors told his family that the damage to his brain was too far gone. There was no chance he would recover. The family wanted to take him off life support right away, but they were told they had to wait. The jail still had decision-making authority over his care while he was technically in custody. The family had to fight just to say goodbye on their own terms. On July 20th, Thomas Carr was removed from life support. He died at 2:11 in the afternoon. After he died, the family learned something about Thomas Carr that added another layer of weight to an already unbearable story. Thomas Carr had donated his organs. His liver and his kidneys were given to other people. 3 lives were saved because of what was left of Thomas Carr after what Claude Lewis did to him. 3 strangers are alive today because of a man who walked into a county jail for a drunk driving charge and never walked out. But his eyes could not be donated. The injuries to his face and his eyes were too severe. Too much damage had been done. In the days and weeks after Thomas Carr died, the Wayne County Sheriff's Office tried to control the story. Sheriff Raphael Washington held a press conference and said the murder was the fault of one deputy, the deputy who missed his rounds, the deputy who did not show up on the north side of the 11th floor that night. Washington said if that officer had done his job, he could have stopped the assault or possibly even helped Carr after it happened. That deputy was suspended. He later resigned from the sheriff's office entirely. But not everyone in county government agreed that the blame stopped with one man. A county commissioner named Glenn Anderson, who later voted to approve the settlement payment to the Carr family, said something very different. He said the failures that day went beyond one employee. He said it indicated there was a bigger problem. And he said he was reluctant to believe that anything should stop with the one individual who did not make the rounds. Glenn Anderson was not wrong, because the deputy who missed his rounds was not working alone that night. He was one of 3 deputies covering a floor that was supposed to have 5. He was one man in a system that had already told him, through that memo, that 3 was enough. The system set him up to fail. And when he did fail, the system pointed at him and said it was his fault. That is how it works. That is how the rule protects itself. The lawsuit was filed on November 30th, 2023. 4 months after Thomas Carr died. It was filed in federal court. The attorneys representing his family asked for $10 million. But they were not asking for the money just to ask. They were asking because they had done the math. They had looked at what Wayne County had paid out in other cases. And they knew what this one was worth. What the family wanted more than money was an answer to a simple question. How did this happen? How did a man serving 26 days for drunk driving end up beaten to death in his cell by someone who should never have been in that cell to begin with? Wayne County did not want to answer that question in court, so they settled. $7 million, the largest negligence settlement the county had paid in over a decade. The attorney who filed the lawsuit was a man named Vince Colella. Colella was a civil rights attorney based in Southfield, Michigan. He had built a career representing families who lost people because systems failed. And when he read the facts of Thomas Carr's case, he knew immediately that this was not just negligence. It was, in his words, gross negligence. And it was reckless. Colella had reached out to Wayne County multiple times after Thomas Carr died. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests. Those are public records requests that allow citizens to force government agencies to hand over documents. Colella wanted to see what the jail knew about Claude Lewis. He wanted to see the intake forms, the classification records, the mental health screenings. He wanted proof that Wayne County had the information they needed to prevent what happened and chose not to act on it. Wayne County did not respond to those requests. For months, Colella got nothing. No documents. No explanations. No acknowledgement. Then, on November 30th, 2023, Colella filed the lawsuit. And within 30 minutes of filing, Wayne County suddenly sent him a report. A scant report, as Colella later described it. A report with almost no details about what happened on the 11th floor that night. Colella questioned publicly whether the report even complied with Michigan's Freedom of Information Act. But he had what he needed. The lawsuit was filed, and it laid everything out in black and white. The lawsuit said Wayne County was deliberately indifferent to its duty to provide for Carr's safety and welfare. Those words, deliberately indifferent, are not just dramatic language. They are a legal standard. They mean the county knew there was a serious risk and chose to ignore it anyway. The lawsuit pointed to the line database. It said Wayne County had access to warnings that Claude Lewis may harm himself or others. It said the county knew Lewis had been involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital in 2022 and hospitalized again in 2021. It said the county knew Lewis had 2 prior convictions for aggravated battery. All of that information was available before Lewis was placed in a cell with Thomas Carr. The lawsuit also pointed to the 911 call Lewis made himself. It said Lewis told the operator he was schizophrenic and bipolar. He said he needed inpatient mental health housing and treatment. He asked not to be sent to jail. He asked to go to a psychiatric hospital instead. And Wayne County jailed him anyway. Then the lawsuit pointed to the classification policy. It said the jail's own written policy stated that inmates charged with or convicted of assaultive crimes should not be housed with inmates charged with nonviolent offenses. Lewis was there on a domestic violence charge. Domestic violence is an assaultive offense. Carr was there for operating while intoxicated. That is a nonviolent misdemeanor. Under the jail's own rules, they should never have been in the same cell. The lawsuit also said that if Lewis had been placed on a mental health floor, where he should have been, he would have been in a solo cell. He would not have had a cellmate at all. And he would have been monitored more closely than inmates in the general population. And finally, the lawsuit pointed to the memo, the one from early 2021, that cut staffing on the 11th floor from 5 guards to 3. The lawsuit said that because of a staffing reduction, there were 2 unoccupied wards on the 11th floor, wards that still had inmates, and wards where no guard came for hours. The lawsuit put it all together. It said Wayne County created the conditions that killed Thomas Carr, and it said the county knew exactly what it was doing. Wayne County did not fight the lawsuit. They did not go to trial. They did not try to argue that they had done their job correctly. Instead, they proposed early facilitation. That is a process where both sides sit down with a mediator and try to settle before the case goes any further. The county said they wanted to prevent a prolonged litigation process. They said they recognized the tragedy that occurred. After multiple days of negotiations, the parties agreed to a settlement. $7 million. Wayne County would pay $5 million. The county's insurance would pay the remaining $2 million. The settlement was approved by the Wayne County Board of Commissioners in July of 2024, almost exactly 1 year after Thomas Carr died. It still needed to be approved by a judge, but it was done. $7 million is not a small number. For context, Wayne County had approved over 200 lawsuit settlements since 2010. Of all of those settlements, the $7 million payment to the Carr family was the largest negligence payout by far. It was not the largest settlement overall, but it was the largest one tied to a case where the county failed to do something it was supposed to do, and someone died because of it. A county commissioner named Sam Baydown voted to approve the settlement. When asked about the size of the payout, he said considering the potential exposure of liability, it could have been worse. That is a telling statement. Baydown was not saying the county got off easy. He was saying that if the case had gone to trial, a jury might have awarded the family even more. But not everyone on the county commission was satisfied with just approving the settlement and moving on. Glenn Anderson, the same commissioner who had spoken out after the sheriff blamed a single deputy, said again that the failures went beyond one employee. He said it indicated there was a bigger problem, and he said he was reluctant to believe that anything should stop with the one individual who did not make the rounds. Anderson was right to push back, because the settlement, while it gave the Carr family money, did not change anything inside the Wayne County Jail. The memo cutting staffing from 5 to 3 guards was still in effect. The classification system that failed to separate Lewis and Carr was still in place. The mental health screening process that failed to flag Lewis was still being used. Nothing had changed, or at least, nothing had changed yet. On the same day the settlement was announced, July 15, 2024, something else happened. The United States Department of Justice announced that it had reached a landmark settlement agreement with Wayne County. This was separate from the Carr family lawsuit. This was a federal civil rights case that had been going on for years. The DOJ had opened its investigation back in 2018 after receiving complaints that the Wayne County Jail routinely failed to provide services to inmates with disabilities. The complaint said inmates were not getting access to prescription medications. They were not getting mental health services. They were not getting medical equipment. And they were not getting proper assessments when they first arrived at the jail. The investigation also looked into the 8 suicides that had happened in 2016 and 2017. The same suicides that had led to the first DOJ settlement years earlier. And the investigation found that the problems had not been fixed. They had gotten worse. The new settlement required Wayne County to make serious changes. The jail would have to develop procedures to identify inmates with disabilities when they arrived. It would have to provide access to physical health, mental health, and dental services for all inmates with disabilities. It would have to create programs for detox and treatment for people with substance use disorder. It would have to create a plan to make sure inmates received their prescribed medications. And it would have to make robust revisions to the suicide prevention program. The agreement also required Wayne County to submit regular compliance reports to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And it required the county to hire at least one expert consultant to help implement the changes. The agreement would remain in effect for 3 years, unless Wayne County could demonstrate durable compliance before that. U.S. Attorney Dawn Eisen made a statement when the settlement was announced. She said Wayne County had a long and troubled history of providing inadequate services to inmates who have disabilities. She acknowledged that Wayne County was in the process of moving inmates into a new $616 million jail facility that was being built near the highway. But she said something important. She said a new building does not ensure access to those vital services. That statement was critical, because Wayne County had been talking about the new jail for years. They had been saying it would solve everything. New cells, new technology, new security systems. But Dawn Eisen was saying that none of that mattered if the people running the jail did not change the way they operated. Wayne County Corporation Counsel, the county's legal team, put out a statement in response. It said the health, safety, and welfare of all inmates in Wayne County's custody was their top priority. It said the county had been cooperating with the DOJ since the investigation began in 2018. It said the county had already implemented many of the required policies over the last several years. And it said the agreement was a testament to the county's commitment to providing quality medical care to inmates. The statement was professional. It was cooperative. But it did not mention Thomas Carr. It did not mention Bryant Searcy. It did not mention Antonio James. It did not mention the 8 people who took their own lives in 2016 and 2017. It did not name a single person who had died inside the Wayne County Jail while the county was working collaboratively with the DOJ. Virginia Atkins, Thomas Carr's sister, spoke to reporters after the settlement was approved. She said she was terrified for anyone spending time in the jail. And she said something that should be obvious, but apparently needed to be said out loud. She said nobody should go in there for a misdemeanor and have it be a death sentence. Nobody should go into a county jail for drunk driving and come out in a body bag. That is not how the system is supposed to work. And yet, in Wayne County, that is exactly how it worked. For years, the family got $7 million. The DOJ got its agreement. The county got to say it was committed to change. And the question that nobody seemed willing to answer was still sitting there, waiting. Who decided that this was acceptable? Who looked at the memo cutting guards from 5 to 3 and said yes? Who looked at Claude Lewis's record and mental health warnings and said it was fine to put him in a cell with a man who was there for a DUI? Who made that call? Because someone did. And until the name of that person is known, until there is actual accountability beyond a settlement payment and a promise to do better, the rule is still in place. The rule that says when there are not enough guards, you keep the jail open anyway. The rule that says you do the best you can with what you have and hope nothing goes wrong. The rule that killed Thomas Carr. And the question now is whether that rule will ever be. On September 3rd, 2024, Wayne County opened the doors to a brand new criminal justice complex. 5 buildings, over 1 million square feet, 26 courtrooms, a new adult jail, a new juvenile detention facility, free parking, state-of-the-art technology. It had been 13 years in the making. It cost over $500 million. And on that first day, Wayne County Executive Warren Evans stood in front of reporters and cameras and said it was a great day. A sigh of relief. The culmination of a decade of work. It was supposed to be the answer. The building that would fix everything. The place where the failures of the old Wayne County Jail would finally be left behind. Within a week, inmates were fighting. Attorneys could not meet with their clients. Inmates were protesting by refusing to go to court. And the same staffing shortage that had plagued the old jail was still there, still unsolved, still making it impossible to run the building the way it was supposed to be run. The building had changed, but the rule had not. The new Wayne County Criminal Justice Center sits on Russell Street, just north of East Warren Avenue, and right next to Interstate 75. It is massive. The adult jail alone can hold up to 2,280 inmates. The juvenile detention facility can hold up to 120 young people. The courthouse has offices for the Wayne County prosecutor, the Wayne County sheriff, and over 1,400 other employees spread across the entire complex. The county expects around 1,000 visitors to walk through the doors every single day. The building itself is modern. The cells do not have bars. They have cameras instead. The juvenile facility has a gym, a library, a basketball court, an outdoor recreation area, arts and crafts programs. The courthouse has video monitors and assisted listening devices. There are 52 private rooms where attorneys can meet with clients. That is a huge improvement over the old Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, which had none. Wayne County officials said the new center was designed to focus on rehabilitation instead of punishment. They said it would provide a higher level of service for the community. They said it would make the criminal justice system safer and more efficient for everyone. County Commission Chairwoman Alicia Bell said the new building represented a major step forward in criminal justice, not just for Wayne County, but also nationwide. But there was a problem that no amount of modern design could fix. There were still not enough people to run it. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office was supposed to have 925 budgeted positions for jail deputies. That number is not new. It had been the same for years. But by January 2024, just months before the new jail opened, the office had 195 vacancies in corporal positions alone. That is out of 453 budgeted corporal spots. Nearly half were empty. And it was not just a jail. The entire sheriff's office was bleeding staff. About 90 deputies retired or quit in a single year. A new class of 30 recruits graduated in late 2023 and started working in the jail. Union officials said they expected half of them to be gone within 30 days. And they were right. Most new hires did not last more than 6 months. The reasons were the same as they had always been. Low pay, dangerous conditions, mandatory overtime. Starting salary for a Wayne County jail deputy was still around $35,000 a year. That was nearly $10,000 below the national average for corrections officers. And the overtime was relentless. Some deputies were working 60 hours a week. Some worked over 80 hours in a single week and were then suspended for refusing to work yet another shift. One deputy worked over 100 hours in a single week and was disciplined when he said he could not come in again because he needed to care for his father after heart surgery. The union filed complaints. They said the staffing shortage was creating dangerous conditions. They said deputies were drinking more, getting divorced, becoming estranged from their families, nearly falling asleep at the wheel driving home from work. Reginald Crawford, the union president, said it was a crisis, and he said there was no accountability for the problems. The county tried to patch the holes. In March 2024, the Wayne County Board of Commissioners approved a $4.9 million contract with a private security company called Allied Universal. The company would send 50 armed security guards to fill vacant deputy positions in the courthouses. The guards would only work in non-criminal courts. It was a temporary fix. The contract was for 1 year, with an option to renew. Chief Judge Patricia Perez-Frezet said she expected the county to have enough deputies to cover the courtrooms within a year. But the jail was a different story. You cannot hire private security guards to watch over inmates. That job has to be done by trained deputies. And there were not enough of them. When the new criminal justice complex opened in September 2024, the problem started almost immediately. Defense attorneys began speaking out. They said there were only 5 booths in the new jail where they could meet with clients. The old facilities had 25. Attorneys said they were waiting hours just to see a single client. Some said they had to set aside entire blocks of time, multiple hours, just to get through the security process and wait for a booth to open up. Attorney David Cripps told reporters it was frustrating for everyone, for the lawyers, for the clients, for the families. He said in the old jail, he could get in and out in 15 minutes. Now it was taking hours. And the problem was not just access. The courthouse also had cramped meeting spaces, doors that automatically locked attorneys inside rooms with their clients. No privacy, no room to spread out case files. Cripps said his clients were also complaining about conditions in the jail itself. Living spaces were confined. Inmates were getting into fights that should never have occurred. Some inmates did not have access to phones or commissary accounts. Their families were calling attorneys, saying they could not put money into their loved ones' accounts and could not get in touch with them. And then, some inmates started refusing to go to court. They said it was a protest. They were upset about the conditions, about the lack of communication with their families, about being locked in tight spaces with people they did not know. Wayne County Executive Warren Evans put out a statement. He said an undertaking such as this involved considerable planning and was no easy task. He congratulated Sheriff Raphael Washington and his team for accomplishing the move. He said getting acclimated to a new and complex facility required time, and he said the county would make any adjustments necessary to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone who worked at or lived in the Criminal Justice Center. It was the same language that had been used for years. Adjustments, time, hard work, promises. A spokesperson for the sheriff's office, Ed Foxworth, told reporters that the sheriff and his staff were excited about the collaborative environment the new center allowed for. He did not address the staffing shortages. He did not address the fights. He did not address the protests. He said the new building was a positive step forward. But when reporters reached out to the union, the Wayne County Deputy Sheriff's Association, they did not get a comment. And that silence said more than any statement could have, because the union had been saying for years that the staffing shortage was a crisis. They had warned in 2021 that if things did not change, someone was going to be murdered inside those walls. They were right. Bryant Searcy was killed in 2020. Thomas Carr was killed in 2023. And between those 2 deaths, the memo-cutting guards from 5 to 3 stayed in place. The classification system stayed broken. The mental health screening stayed inadequate. Nothing changed. And now the county had a brand new building, a $500 million facility. And the same people who could not keep the old jail safe were trying to run this one. Here is the truth that nobody in Wayne County government wanted to say out loud. The new building did not solve the problem, because the problem was never the building. The problem was the rule that said when there are not enough guards, you keep the jail open anyway. You do not close the doors. You do not sound an alarm. You do not stop accepting new inmates. You just spread the guards you have as thin as they will go and hope that nothing goes wrong. That rule killed Thomas Carr. It killed Bryant Searcy. It contributed to the deaths of Antonio James and 8 people who took their own lives in 2016 and 2017. And it was still in place when the new jail opened its doors. U.S. Attorney Dawn Eisen had said it herself when the federal settlement was announced. A new building does not ensure access to those vital services. It does not guarantee that inmates with mental health issues will be screened properly. It does not guarantee that violent offenders will be separated from nonviolent offenders. It does not guarantee that there will be enough guards on every floor to stop an attack before it happens. All a new building does is give you newer walls to put the same broken system inside. As of early 2025, Wayne County is still under federal oversight. The Department of Justice Settlement Agreement from July 2024 requires the county to submit regular compliance reports for 3 years. The county has to prove that it is identifying inmates with disabilities when they arrive, that it is providing mental health services, that it is making sure people get their medications, that it has a functioning suicide prevention program. None of those things were in place when Thomas Carr died. And the question that his family is still asking, the question that anyone who hears the story should be asking, is whether those things are truly in place now. The county says yes. The county says it has been working collaboratively with the DOJ since 2018. The county says it has already implemented many of the required policies. The county says the new building is a testament to its commitment to providing quality care. But words are not the same as action. Promises are not the same as results. And a new building with the same staffing shortages, the same classification failures, and the same unspoken rule is not a solution. It is just a more expensive version of the same problem. Thomas Carr's sister, Virginia Atkins, said she was terrified for anyone spending time in the Wayne County Jail. She said nobody should go in there for a misdemeanor and have it be a death sentence. And she was right. Nobody should. But in Wayne County, that is what happens when the rule is more important than the people it is supposed to protect. The rule that says you keep the doors open no matter what. The rule that says you do the best you can with what you have. The rule that says it is better to run a broken system than to admit the system is broken. That rule is still there. It is still operating. And until someone in power decides to break it, people are still at risk. Thomas Carr walked into the Wayne County Jail on a Thursday morning in July 2023 to serve 26 days for drunk driving. He never made it to the next day. His family got $7 million. The county got a new building. The DOJ got its settlement. And the rule that killed him is still in place. The question now is how many more people will have to die before that changes.